All right, it's the elephant in the room. It's the elephant in the room. Somebody asked Caitlin Clark about it during media day, and she finally gave an answer on this Raven Johnson situation and being teammates and potentially sharing the court together and building chemistry and things like that. Caitlin Clark finally addressed the elephant in the room.
Clark, a deep three.
Caitlin Clark exploded at Fever Camp. And no, not with words. She exploded with presence, because one awkward Raven Johnson moment on day one turned into a full-blown storm by day two, and the second that footage started spreading, fans knew this story was not dying quietly.
Camp media availability, Caitlin Clark making it very clear she wants to play, she's ready to play, she's capable of playing. And then Stephanie White making it very clear she's not going to have a superstar on this team. She's not. There is no me, it's we.
What looked like a tiny training camp interaction suddenly felt like the first warning sign of something bigger. Not just drama, not just social media noise, something bigger. Because when Caitlin Clark is involved, nothing stays small for long. And that is exactly why this blew up.
Of Raven Clark deciding she's not going to high-five Caitlin Clark. And this is exactly what the Indiana Fever have brought on this season. The fact is, if you do not draft this person, I'm not making this video right now. We're not talking about this. But the fact is, all eyes are going to be on both of these players. And the Indiana Fever have nobody to blame but themselves, not the fans. Not the unhappy fans that warned you the very second that you announced your pick at number 10, you're inviting drama.
The clip itself is simple. Players are moving through a normal high-five line. Routine stuff, automatic stuff, the kind of thing nobody ever talks about. Then Caitlin steps forward, hand ready, and Raven Johnson appears to step back, lower her head, and the contact never happens. That is it. No shouting, no confrontation, no obvious scene. But the energy of the moment breaks instantly, and sometimes that is all it takes. Because the second fan saw it, the internet split in half. One side said it was blatant disrespect. The other side said people were forcing a narrative out of nothing. But once Caitlin Clark is in the middle of a clip, there is no such thing as just a random camp moment anymore.
We all know there has been a bunch of nonsense surrounding this Raven Johnson selection. Me personally, I'm now rooting for Raven Johnson. I want her to play well with Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever, as I do all the players on the team. But with the draft pick, there was a lot that came with that. There's a lot going on with South Carolina fans and Caitlin Clark fans online and stuff like that. People getting threatened, all types of stuff. It has gone way too far. Like, it's not that serious.
Every look gets replayed. Every movement gets slowed down. Every tiny detail gets treated like evidence. And that is where this stopped being a clip and started becoming a storyline. Because fans did not watch that moment in a vacuum. They watched it with everything Caitlin already brings into the room. The spotlight, the pressure, the attention, the division, the obsession. Caitlin is not just another player in camp. She is the center of gravity. She changes the temperature of the gym the second she walks in. So when something even slightly awkward happens around her, people do not shrug and move on. They start connecting dots. And that is why Raven Johnson became the center of this debate almost immediately. Fair or not, fans were never going to treat that clip like an isolated mistake. The second they saw that missed moment, they started reading into it. Tension, discomfort, resistance. Maybe even the early signs that not everybody inside that building is fully comfortable with how much Caitlin Clark changes the team the moment she steps on the floor. Now, does that one clip prove all of that? Number. But did it unlock that conversation instantly? Absolutely. And that is what made day two so important. Because day one got people talking. Day two made people stop. That is where this whole thing took a turn. According to the second transcript, the gym felt tighter on day two. The players looked sharper. The energy felt more alert. Even the warm-up did not feel normal anymore. Why? because now everybody knew the cameras were rolling, everybody knew the first clip was already out there, and everybody knew Caitlin Clark was walking right back into the middle of it. That kind of pressure changes a building before the ball even starts moving, and then Caitlin started playing. That is the real pivot in this story, because once the basketball kicked in, this stopped feeling like internet drama and started feeling like a warning. The transcript describes a stretch where Caitlin began controlling everything. The reads got quicker, the spacing got cleaner, the pace changed. A pass split open a gap that should not have been there. A pull-up created space instead of waiting for it. Possession after possession, the gym started reacting to her instead of the other way around. Not loud, not flashy, just complete control. And that kind of control does something to people. It makes them hesitate. It makes them second guess. It makes them feel the shift before they can even explain what changed. That is the explosion, not some emotional outburst, not some dramatic meltdown. The explosion was impact. The explosion was control. The explosion was watching one player bend the energy of the entire gym without needing to say a single word. And once that happened, the first clip started feeling heavier. Because now the question was not just, did Raven Johnson disrespect Caitlin Clark? Now the question became, what happens when the biggest star in the building is also the one taking over the building? That is when the pressure really starts. Because if you are a teammate, that changes everything. If you are a coach, that changes everything. If you are the Fever, that changes everything. Now every interaction gets watched differently. Every reaction gets judged differently. Every small moment gets stacked on top of the last one until fans feel like they are watching a pattern instead of a coincidence. That is how stories like this grow. Not because one clip proves everything, but because every next clip starts feeding what people already believe. And make no mistake, this is exactly the kind of story that can swallow a team early if they are not careful. Because training camp is supposed to be where chemistry gets built quietly. Instead, Indiana is trying to build chemistry while the entire internet is dissecting body language. That is a problem, because if camp already feels this tense, what happens when the real pressure starts? What happens when minutes get cut, touches get reduced, and somebody has to sacrifice? What happens when frustration is no longer just hypothetical? That is when little moments stop being little. That is when they come back. Now, to be fair, yes, there are people saying this whole thing is overblown. They think the clip got taken out of context. They think fans are reading too much into body language because Caitlin Clark is involved. And that is possible. This is not hard proof of some giant locker room war. But that does not make it harmless. Because sometimes perception becomes pressure long before the truth catches up. And in a situation like this, pressure changes behavior. Pressure changes chemistry. Pressure changes the way people move around each other. That is why this matters. And here is why Caitlin comes out of this looking stronger, not weaker. She did not force a response. She did not create a scene. She did not feed the chaos. She stayed focused. She stayed composed. She kept competing. And that matters because in a moment like this, the calmest person in the storm usually ends up looking like the strongest person in the room. While everybody else was debating the clip, Caitlin looked like the one person who understood the fastest way to answer noise is to control the floor. And that is my biggest takeaway from all of this. I do not think this one clip proves every wild theory flying around online, but I do think it exposed something real. It exposed how fragile the energy around this team already feels. It exposed how quickly anything involving Caitlin Clark turns into a full-scale battle online. And most importantly, it exposed that by day 2, Caitlin did not look rattled. She looked like the player dictating everything. And that is the part people inside that gym had to feel immediately. Because it is one thing to deal with Caitlin Clark, the headline. It is another thing to deal with Caitlin Clark, the force. So now the Fever have a real challenge in front of them. Not just winning games, managing the spotlight, managing the chemistry, managing what happens when every tiny moment becomes content and every camp clip becomes a referendum on the team. Because if this is how loud it already is before the season even starts, imagine what happens once the first real adversity hits. That is when we find out whether this was just a weird camp moment or the first sign that something underneath this team is already unstable. So now I want to hear from you. Did Raven Johnson really disrespect Caitlin Clark, or is this whole thing being blown out of proportion?